And welcome back, everyone, to the Zanpakuto creation series. For Antonio Spedaldo, I think I may have butchered the name a little bit, but you've commented before on anything. Cipallo. Cipallo. You asked the question, what is the Monsterverse's version of Kong's Zanpakuto? Now remember, a Zanpakuto is a reflection of you. It is you. You and your Zanpakuto are essentially one and the same. It is a reflection of who you are. So abilities that a character has, again, we'll use Naruto as an example, the Rasengan, Shadow Clones, all that, those don't translate necessarily into the Zanpakuto. We look at who the character is. But there are examples I had last week of Natsu, where their abilities are so intrinsically tied to who they are that I think it can work. Now, Kong falls into a weird area, because Kong isn't human, first off. But beyond, like, I did the I-Rex, I did the Indominus Rex a while back, too. I'm like, I guess I can do it. Is he sentient enough to hold a Zanpakuto? No, probably not. But for the sake of argument, let's assume he is. Kong, though, is so intelligent and clearly has what would be labeled a soul that I think we can't do that. But the question is, how unique do I make this? Do I make it something completely different than some of the few tools he's used, or do I go lean more towards that route? I think actually in this case we can lean more towards the latter. What do I mean by that? Well, first off, we have to shrink Kong down. Kong, even by like Bleach standards, would be too large to be a Shinigami. Like even the giants that exist within the Soul Society aren't really all that huge compared to Kong. So I'm not saying we couldn't make him big, but he'd be more akin to, honestly, his Peter Jackson level of size. Where he was huge, but he wasn't unrealistic. And I think we can like shrink Kong down here, because that's the only way this works. He's not wielding a giant building Zanpakuto. That's just not what it is. But that being said, what type of Zanpakuto does he have? I still think it's a standard katana. I do think that's the case. Most Shinigami, about 99%, not 99, but like 90% of them have a standard katana. Some of them have a wakizashi. Some of them have a kodachi. Some of them have a tanto. Some of them do have weapons that are not straight katanas. But 9 times out of 10, you're getting the katana. Now, because Kong can't speak, it's difficult to say what the release would be. But assuming we're looking at a version of Kong, because we know we can learn sign language. And we do, in fact, have a Shinigami right now who is at minimum deaf. I think he's mute and deaf, though. But because he's a Shinigami, he can sense things with spiritual pressure, all that. And the 7th Squad Lieutenant, Arturo, I don't remember his full name, who like inscribes his release command on his Zanpakuto. I think Kong, you could have that too, where it's instead of give birth, it's, in his case, it's take it back. Now, the actual name of the Zanpakuto would be Lizard Killer, or Tokage Kira. Or Kira, sorry. It's Bankai that was Lizard King Executioner, or Rizado Shukai Kijo. So, with that said, what does this Zanpakuto look like? What's the spirit of the Zanpakuto? Spirit is, I think, just an old, battered Kong wrapped in the scales of former fallen foes. Now, keep in mind, we will still look at this in the context of Bleach, but adapted from his actual lore. I think it still takes the form of his Godzilla axe. And I don't know if it looks 100% like that, like it looks like a bone axe with a Godzilla glowing dorsal plate in there. Like the handle itself might look a little bit more ornate, but it could still have like bone-like designs added onto it. But I do think the dorsal plate looks the same. And what it would do is do the exact same thing it does in the actual movie. It absorbs energy. Now, it doesn't absorb all energy. Like, it doesn't absorb the ice from Shimo when Shimo attacks him, but it does absorb and, keep back Godzilla's atomic breath, because it's made from one of his kind's dorsal plates. So it's attuned to his energy. I think that would work the same thing here, but would say like hollow energy and Ryatsu. Now, I'm not saying it can absorb everything. In fact, that would be the main big weakness here, is that it it can't absorb anything. It can't absorb ice. We know that for a fact. I also don't think it absorbs things like water, and fire is a difficult one to say if it could absorb or not. I think it falls in the category of, yes, it's energy. Yes, it can be absorbed, but because no one's ever like using a concentrated beam of fire, it's not like it can just block the fire. Like he could like swipe his axe through the flames and start absorbing it to increase the power of the blade, but he could not block fire. But like a bolt of lightning, he could block that. A Getsugatencho, in theory, he could block that, but because of the sheer size of how some of the Getsugatenchos Ichigo throws are, that'd be debatable. That'd be like really Ryatsu fighting Ryatsu. That's his spiritual energy versus Ichigo. Like him, all that power hitting a concentrated point, can he hold it back enough to absorb it all? And so it would be a power of Ryatsu versus Ryatsu. But obviously, just like in the Monsterverse, what this other secondary ability is it takes that energy and just enhances the cutting power of it. And I could see there being no definitive limit. But I could see that it could still be overwhelmed. Like, there could be a rate of absorption it has. Like, in theory, it wouldn't necessarily be destroyed, but the absorption could be disrupted, basically, if he's not careful. I could see that. Now, in Bankai, again, it could be like, the Bankai I see as him kind of being donned in all the scales, even further, like a bit of like a pseudo armor of these spikes all over his body, to in essence mimic one of Godzilla's species. And so therefore it has all the abilities of the Shikai added on. It also has, say, like the nuclear pulse ability of the Godzilla species. I don't think he gets a nuclear breath. I don't think he gets the atomic breath. But I think the atomic pulse would definitely be on the table. He's now basically in a bladed armor, so he could, and I think he even like maybe gains this kind of pseudo tail added on. Similar now, Zaraki's Bankai does alter his body. I think this could be somewhat of a body-altering Bankai. We don't get many of those. A Bankai that literally physically changes you. But there are the rare few. Now, that being said, just like with a couple Zanpakuto, I think one of the ones I talked about, I'd have to go back through some of my Zanpakuto lists about characters who have this, but there would be Zanpakuto that are more powerful the more, say, energy they absorbed, or the more something has happened in like the Shikai form before going in the Bankai. This is one where you can go either way. Like it can still absorb attacks, like energy attacks, but it's just, that's not the primary function of the Zanpakuto anymore. That's more like a weaker function. In fact, the energy absorption, I'd argue, is maybe weaker now in the Bankai, but the upside is you are now just covered like head to toe and more of these blades that can still offset energy. I'm sure you can use your own energy too, just like Godzilla uses his own energy, and that's kind of like your pseudo Godzilla at this point. But the idea would also be that if you're able to absorb just enough energy in the Shikai again, you'll have that much more in the Bankai. Now again, this Zanpakuto would still not be good against fire types very well. Granted, with that many blades on you, you could definitely offset a lot more fire and absorb a lot more of it quicker, but at the same time, like I said, it's not a primary function now of the Zanpakuto. That being said, in terms of melee, you'd be dangerous as hell, and the fact that you now have range attacks in the Bankai would be a boon in dealing with like long range foes. But overall, I think that would also be the big Achilles heel here, is that even though you can still absorb energy, it's not as effective, and you'd still be wearing out your own energy, which is true for any Bankai, but still. So I would still say it'd be a cool Bankai to go with, but again, we have to change Kong up just a little bit here. In fact, he's kind of a Sajin stand-in in Bleach, because Sajin obviously is a wolf man, and Bleach deals a lot with Buddhism and reincarnation, and apparently he was reincarnated into like the Beast Clan, which is one of the realms, the animal path of reincarnation in Buddhism. So you could see Kong kind of being like that, but now as a gorilla. Anyway, I digress though. Let me know what you think. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you next time. Later.